Alrighty, what's going on, guys? So I'm going to be doing this a little bit on the fly, but I definitely have some names to focus on for the upcoming week. This will be the week of, what is it? July 15th. So let's go take a look at the economic calendar first of all, just to see what we have in the way, because data is very important for those of you guys who don't understand how price will kind of move one way to then data facilitating it the other way based off of like kind of how it typically works. Um, we do have initial jobless claims on 8:30 a.m. on Thursday. And that's basically all we really have. So we're going to see how the tape kind of reacts as we move into the first day of the whole entire week. One thing that I will have to say about the market right now is that we're kind of in a weird time with our former president being shot in the ear. I'm not going to like get too much into this kind of stuff, but obviously the crypto market really did start kind of moving based off of what happened. And then we obviously cannot really tell yet what's going to happen with some of these other names. Obviously, miners are going to see a nice move and likely are going to see a gap up into tomorrow morning. And then other than that, all we can really deal with is the data that we collected from last week, bringing it into this week, trading the individual names, the names that are less noisy aside from Mag 7 at these new all-time highs after new all-time highs after new all-time highs that we can't necessarily get a full entire kind of read on, right? With really, really, really reliable risk levels. So we're kind of just going to be trading and sticking with the names that I don't necessarily uh, have a like really, really, really like frequent type of style with, if that makes sense. Meaning like I don't necessarily trade these names a lot of the time, but they're really shaping up to become really nice charts. So there's they're charts that I can't necessarily ignore. So the first chart that I do want to get into is Rivian. I took this trade last week for a really nice win. I noticed that there was really no true seller that was really pinning price beneath this swing high or beneath this gap. Those were my two really strong points of emphasis where we try to create a little lower high and a resistance off of. The volume was never really too strong right over there, and then we kind of push beneath that spot, put in low of days off of this gap, and then from there, that's whenever we claim the level and then saw the continuation above the earnings candle high. We never saw any true strong sell off of the earnings candle high. So that was a really, really, really nice trade that was really risk free. I never really had any drawdown on this trade as I accumulated calls over here and then rode these kind of up into the $17, $18 psych levels. This did reach up almost into the $19 levels. But one thing that I will have to emphasize is that Tesla had a really strong move within the market. This has been one of the names that has had a ton of short side over leveraged kind of exposure to it. With every single pop being, oh my gosh, Tesla's going to go, and then every single drop was Tesla's done for, right? And likely what that leads to is over leveraging of one particular side. And then once that tension gets released off of that particular side and you start seeing the absorption of any sort of supply left over within the name, then you get a massive squeeze and then a rebalance back up into these higher levels that need to be retested if it does want to move its way lower. That's kind of just the fundamental ways of how Mag 7 kind of works. And then obviously long side exposure had a ton of strong sentiment behind it that led into the swing high from over here. We swept the swing high, we failed it, we got news, and then that's whenever a lot of these long side traders kind of got bagged and we got this pullback kind of back into this gap that is now being retested for, and we're kind of reevaluating at these spots where okay, we have a very strong trend with little to no consolidation, more and less just a short squeeze, right? So is any sort of willing bid going to be stepping up into the name at these previous swing highs? No, what they're more or less going to do is be taking profit and then reevaluating the equity down here through these imbalanced areas within the trend. looking at if they would want to obviously rebid or sell it off a little bit more and get a little bit more of a discounted entry, right? So with this overall outlier trend, we would obviously want to look for a proxy to this name itself within the electric vehicle industry, that being Rivian, right? This has been a really strong move with, like I said, record high daily volume coming off of this earnings gap up. If you look at like the daily volume, you're going to be able to see how this is the heaviest volume that we've ever had on the daily chart. And then once you go to the weekly chart, this is also some of the heaviest volume that we've ever had on the weekly chart itself, right? So when you're looking at this kind of underperforming the overall market with Tesla kind of moving very, 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 very strongly, and then you're getting really strong volume off of these earnings reports, really heavy um, volume and really nice gap ups with a 23% move on the underlying for this report. Actually, this wasn't even a report. Never mind. I thought this was a report. It was not a report. This was just, I guess, news that was kind of aligning with that electric vehicle rotation in the market, which could also spark, obviously, some risk on names kind of performing very well. So my main focal point was Rivian to kind of take out this resistance up here. That's why I said riding this up into the $17 level is going to be very, very lucrative. We obviously got above this and then kind of broke our way through this area. We did get a false breakout over it the previous following day. So whenever I see this really strong trend on a lot of volume behind it, that's whenever I start looking, okay, this is going to be an outlier mover. What I'm likely looking to do is basically roll profits on this thing, seeing very constructive higher lows. And then we're going to be looking for this thing to kind of move up into like this trend over here, potentially this gap where you can see the $22 range. If we could get this thing up into the $22 range, that would be absolutely fantastic. If we can't, the $21 range could also work very well as well too. So like either or, this is a really strong name that I'm obviously going to be looking to roll profits on. I would really, really, really like this thing to kind of sell off early week and then kind of be reaccumulated into that data. And then we kind of move over into Marvel. Once we go to the weekly chart, you're going to be able to see how this thing was really strong leading into 2021, and then you had this semiconductor kind of sell off leading into 2020, all of 2022, leading into 2023. We got this really nice gap up that kind of started and sparked the overall Nvidia and AMD rotation within Mag 7. This was a really strong daily gap up off of earnings, take swing low to swing high, and then this obviously saw the rotation that was leading into the golden pocket, where then we saw a higher low, a fill of all these gaps down here, and then we obviously saw new highs being created. However, the new highs led to price discovery that was being sold off on. A lot of long side traders were probably trading the breakout up here. That led to the earnings report being a very vulnerable exit liquidity opportunity. However, we do have a hidden gap all the way up here. And one thing that I want to talk about is structure development with higher lows, kind of building higher low by higher low by higher low by higher low, with the overall daily range and the spread of the weekly candles kind of tightening as we move our way into the apex of this little triangle. I'm not a big pattern trader, but one thing that I will have to say, guys, is that this saw a very strong distributive candle with a lot of volume behind it on this earnings report. And not only that, but it was not a gap down, it was also intraday. So whenever we're looking at this kind of bottoming out here on really low volume at the higher lows and rallying into the upper ranges of this imbalance on diminishing buy side volume followed by increasing sell side volume, that's obviously going to be a short for this to pull back down into these gaps or into these levels for then obviously a reevaluation, which led to, like I said again, um, really low volume kind of push up that is now into our all-time high, into lower high, into potentially another lower high. So this is going to be an area where I'm looking at this gap to either hold or fail for then obviously this to then fall beneath this area, break and base the 71 down into 70.40 area for then a move into this support, $67 support, and potentially down into 63.50. If we don't get that, what I'd be looking for then would be a break, a base, and a go right over this $75.50 level. We already did sweep this really strong signal candle that led to obviously a sell-off and a lower high. We did sweep internal lower high ranges, right? So if I did see any sell side aggression, it's going to be based off of this week's high, right? So this week's high would likely be defended. That led to then a lower high on the weekly. That then led to a sell and a move lower. Like I said, with everything kind of in the way with Trump almost being assassinated and then some of these uglier semiconductor names, it's going to be hard to gauge for me. We saw really nice tension released out of some of these names that have been underperformers. For example, INTC. Whenever we go over to the INTC chart, we could really start to see how this was a really strong consolidation break that was on increasing volume to fill some of these bear gaps. But whenever you look at this from the weekly perspective, that is some of the highest weekly volume that we've had ever since 2020, June of 2023, so a year ago. However, do we necessarily know if this is going to be caught with then a higher low on the daily chart or on the hourly chart? No. We more or less just have to see the reaction with the overall market, whether or not the oil names want to see those rotations with a higher low being put in down here on Wednesday, and then they continuously kind of sell off the semis with this ugly NVIDIA chart, which I'll talk about next. So I am positioned within ZOM. This is just one of them charts where we're getting a lot of sell side mitigation within this imbalanced trend that had little to no consolidation. So whenever we look at the hidden gaps over here and where our swing low is really generating itself off of, it's going to be a failure of a previous lower low that was accumulated with a hammer candle off of a nasty gap down that then led to a fill of the gap fill and then obviously a sell lower right back into this little hidden daily bear gap over here, or bull gap, I'm sorry. And then that's whenever we started to find the rotation kind of momentarily into the energy sector, this getting relief into this daily hidden bear gap all the way up from up here from a lower high on this whole entire channel of a trend. So whenever we're looking at this kind of moving its way lower, correcting itself within this imbalanced sector rotation kind of trend, little to no consolidation, that's whenever I start looking for previous lower lows that are accumulated to then fail, rip back above, and then find a higher low off of. Those are typically going to be the areas in which you do find your higher low from, which is exactly where we found it off of, as well as this daily little gap right over here, right? So whenever we're looking at this, we could start really concluding to ourselves we could potentially have a higher low on the daily / weekly chart. I am positioned for this thing to kind of move its way into 115 / 117.26 as an outlier kind of target. If we could get up there, great. If we can't, I'm probably just going to stop out at the trade for break even, as I'm already green on this from loading on Thursday. So we're going to see how this one behaves. Ford Motors is another one of these names where we're getting really strong breakthroughs on daily swing highs with gaps above us. Whenever we're looking at this, we could start saying, hey, there's a gap right above us all the way into the $15 level. This is really strong volume, and we do have earnings. This is next week. So if we could start rolling profits with my previous swing on this, if you guys did watch the first initial video that I did put out for you guys, it was about Ford and how this was in a very long accumulation and kind of catching up to that General Motors, right? General Motors saw a really nice strong breakout with previous rotation happening from the beginning of June. Whenever you go back over to Ford, you're going to be able to see how the beginning of June was kind of stagnant, but we started to see the signs of this previous support with all of this liquidity kind of built off of the $12 range being swiped, and then obviously that buyer kind of stalled where a lower high would be, and then it led to then a higher low and a reclaim of the $12 range, really low volume weekly daily inside bar above the $12 level. And then what it did was kind of just retest into it, got a strong close above, and then volume started to increase as we broke through this lower high structure, right? And then once we broke through the lower high structure, which was the previous lower high, that's whenever we started to get the really strong outlier move that kind of pushed our way into the $13.50 range and above the swing high at 14 bucks, right? So this is one of them charts where I'd be looking for pullbacks. I would not mind a few red days just to see how it kind of behaves and how much of this progress that we've had from bulls kind of being given up. Whenever we look at the daily chart, we could really start concluding to ourselves that there isn't a lot of ground to cover in terms of sell side other than this candle right over here from Friday at the opening range breakout candle, right? So if we were to pull back, what I'd be looking for is a support somewhere within this range, and I'd be willing to extend that execution window all the way down into the lower $13 range, just for, you know, safety. I mean, the premiums are typically cheap, so you do have to be pretty careful if you're buying OTM options on this one. Um, but the ATR isn't very wide, and what I'd be looking for is likely just a higher low on diminishing volume. And if we don't get that, I'd be looking for strength above 14 bucks. I don't know if I talked about Nvidia yet, but one thing that I do want to talk about is how this was a very distributive top heavy range that led to a 3-day consecutive gap down. Obviously, that was reaccumulated with harmonic bearish volume patterns where we start bottoming out towards this very liquid support with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days of support and action kind of broken through. We found the buyer off of it. However, we did not recorrect lower into some of these gaps that are kind of sitting down here, and within some of these imbalanced candles that probably likely need to be retested given the fact that the trend higher was on these bullish spreads that weren't anything super alarming to me. And what I was more or less looking for was just some sort of lower high. The lower high did come off of where we got a gap up. That gap up led to capitulation directly through the gap up, and then we got consolidation towards the close that led to then a gap down, a lower high put in on the hourly, and then a following gap down. That gap down kind of being into this liquid support that started to find the relief. And then obviously this was reaccumulated into that data set that was towards the end of the week, CPI, which led to a very ever so slightly gap up into this previous range of imbalance where we got a gap up and then a complete slice through that gap up. There's obviously a lot of liquidity that's still going to be sitting within there, meaning passive orders. On the ask side, where you're getting capitulation and it's not collecting and filling a lot of those orders that are sitting within those ranges, right? So then obviously if there's a lack of supply towards those lows, then price is obviously going to kind of move its way back towards a very liquid range where there was little to no consolidation or strong constructive higher low being put in from a sell side perspective for healthy trend from a sell side perspective, right? So that's kind of why we got our lower high on the daily off of the 135.58 range, which kind of just pushed into this candle up here, which is where the top potentially started from. And then we got a increased volume sell candle, and then Friday what we got was like a lower volume inside bar towards the lower portion of that candle. If you want to go take a look at NVDS, the inverse ETF of this um, name, what it is a really low volume inside bar with really strong bullish patterns kind of coming off of these lows towards like the $35 to $34 psych, right? So we're getting really increasing volume moves up, followed by these diminishing volume moves lower that lead to increasing volume moves up again, right? Which could show us the intention for what has to come. So we're just kind of gonna wait and see what happens with these names. Another thing that I do really want to emphasize would be SQ. This is in a very important spot just because the weekly chart is showing this previous higher low kind of being taken, a buyer off of it with really low volume where the higher low attempt is. And the only volume that kind of poured into this name was increasing as we ended off the week, right? So this is in one of them things where it's like, all right, we could be potentially in a lower high scenario. Although one thing that I do have to really point out here is that this is a resistance that's been established for 35 days, right? With little to no drawdown. What it more or less did was push towards a support range, fill this gap, find a buyer initially off of the gap with a really heavy volume gap up that led to a sell-off off the earnings report. And then it started to just consolidate towards this low. And then what we did was we kind of got this increasing volume move as we led to the week's close. So I'm very interested in this name just to see how it kind of behaves. It was kind of an outperformer within the ARKK sector itself. ARKK sector as a whole is kind of approaching this resistance that it did get ever so slightly of a close above off of. So I am definitely interested to see how this one kind of moves as we move forward. I'm not necessarily so interested in SMCI, although this did get to QQQ inclusion, I think. I didn't really look into this one yet. This is kind of on the back burner, but it kind of also depends on how semiconductors kind of behave. So this is in like a very strong, well, a very compressed consolidation that I would like to see continue and gather a little bit more info off of from prints and stuff like that. But yeah. So that's kind of all I'm really seeing. Another thing, another chart that I did collect a nice win off of was MO. This was a consumer name that had a really strong, really structurally sound kind of chart with a gap down. The gap down led to a hold of this bear gap that was kind of being claimed and used as progression from bulls, as well as it kind of covering a lot of this buy side trend that had little to no consolidation. And then we kind of moved our way lower into retests that need to be retested, in my opinion. These retests then led to new highs. Those new highs started to see the sell. The sell kind of failed. It reclaimed off of this very strong notable gap that's trying to push price lower with a 3.3% move on the underlying for this given day over here. This is a very notable gap right over here, right? Whenever you're looking from here to here, that is a 3% gap down on an ATR that probably doesn't even have 1% a day of action. I don't even know what the ATR would be on this one. Let's take a look real quick. All right, guys, so the ATR is going to be around, what the hell? I don't really know how to see the ATR, but it looks like the ATR is 64 cents. So whenever you look at like 64 cents on the underlying, it's going to be about 1.3%, right? So this is a very notable gap down that led to a reclaim and then a 5-day base off of that gap down, right? This was also kind of lagging those consumers. So this was a chart that I definitely had a lot of, oh no, I'm fucking up. This is definitely one of them charts that had a lot of kind of like a very notable base off of. And there was really no true sell side kind of, there was really no true sell side volume kind of kicking in on the name over here. And a lot of consumers that were kind of underperforming and then just starting to play out were kind of moving. So that's why I really like this one. And it was a very defined risk right off of 45.75. So that's also a chart that I'll be watching to roll profits off of 48 bucks. And then other than that, I don't necessarily see anything that I absolutely love. Um, there are some other charts that I do have in mind, but I do definitely want to see how the new week kind of reacts to, what happened with Trump, things like that, the crypto market kind of moving. So we're going to see how that kind of plays out in the equity market. And then from there, that's whenever I'll be able to reevaluate and then reassess and kind of see what I want to trade.